Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Loops YouTube channel. I'm Kira, and today, as part of our Authors Corner series, I'll be having a conversation with Megan Alpert about her Airlie Prize winning collection, The Animal at Your Side. She is generously joining us today, even though she is traveling. So thank you so much for being here, Megan.
Thank you.
Yes, so I would love to start with talking about Holly 1962, which you credit as a response to / interpretation of Bridget Potter's essay, Lucky Girl. I read the essay after the poem and have a new appreciation for the images you've borrowed and focused and sharpened from Potter's personal essay about her abortion. How did the ideas for Holly 1962 come together? And are you often similarly inspired by work in other genres?
Yeah, I would say I've been inspired a lot by essays, although other poems that I've written in response to essays have not actually come out as well or well enough to have put in the book. That poem actually started, I had a dream about those last 3 lines, California, me, California, the last 2 lines. And it was like, I have dreams a lot where I'm writing a poem or I have a poem and I kind of half wake up and I'm like, I'm totally going to remember that. And then I go back to sleep and forget all about it. And so that was the first time that I was I'm really going to remember this. And I did. And so I had those 3 lines, and then I had Bridget Potter's essay, which just blew me away in terms of her essay, for those who haven't read it, it doesn't just talk about her getting an abortion before Roe v. Wade. It really talks about the limited options available to women at that time. And I think that was what really struck me. Is it was like, I can have this baby and give it up for adoption and be sent off, to an asylum. I can have this illegal abortion. I can get married right now. I'm not even sure that was an option she considered in the essay, since it wasn't what she wanted, or what her boyfriend wanted. But yeah, I think I had this very strong emotional response to it. And then I have a really strong emotional attachment to California, and going between New York and California was something that I did a lot as a kid, because my parents both grew up, actually I'm in California right now. My parents both grew up here in Los Angeles. And so this is where my grandparents and all my aunts and uncles lived. And so in the essay, I think she goes to Hawaii, or she goes to some island. Maybe it's an island in the Caribbean. And so I did kind of research, would it be possible that somebody would go from New York to California for an abortion at that time? And what I found was that people did, people traveled all over, not because it was necessarily better in one place or another. It was just because it was all word of mouth. And this was before the internet. So you just went to the place that you knew of, that somebody could vouch for, that you heard through the grapevine. So that was kind of how it happened. I didn't want to repeat her essay in a poem, but I wanted to respond to what I felt that she was saying about the ability to craft her own life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. I love that it came to you in a dream.
Yeah.
But also that idea of travel. And I think the word of mouth aspect is really evident in the original text of this is a girl who's desperate. And that desperation not only manifests in all of these awful things that she's doing with her boyfriend. I love the image of her in the bathtub, and I love how that translates to the poem as well. Mm-hmm. But also in the lengths that she's willing to go, and the position she's willing to put herself in. Yeah, thank you. Along that train of thought, in Shane Beer's review of the collection, she says it spans worlds: Eastern Europe, China, Ecuador, folktale, and myth. How did these poems find their home together in this collection? And how does your work pull from the physical and emotional landscape of so many different places? I know you've talked already about your family's connection to California.
Yeah, I would say I come from a family of people who move around a lot. And I think So you were asking how the poems came together as a collection? Was that?
Yeah, sorry, that was two questions. So like how the poems from so many different places came together, but then also how pulling from all these different landscapes affects your work.
Right. So the way this book came together, I guess, was not anything that I didn't sit down and plan, I'm going to write a book about X. It was, I mean, I think this is true probably for a lot of first books. It was more that I wrote and wrote and wrote for years. And then I sat down and was like, okay, what have I been writing about? And I didn't really know how to put a collection together. And then I was at Vermont Studio Center and I had this wonderful meeting with Forrest Gander, who was the kind of like master poet in residence there when I was there. And he was just kind of like, yeah, you just take the poems that go together and put them together. Like, look, these two poems, they kind of go together. And so I just printed out all the poems I had that I thought were worthy of being in a book. And I was like, well, these kind of go together and these kind of go together. And I ended up kind of putting them together by landscape. And that felt very satisfying to me. And I felt that the themes, as I grouped them by landscape, I felt that themes emerged. And it seemed like I had associated certain themes with certain landscapes as I was writing.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see that. And the other thing is, you know, I sent this book out for many years. I would say I kind of lost count, but probably like between 6 and 8 years, let's say. And I did a lot of editing of it. I think about a third of the book has been pulled out and put back in and changed. But no matter what, in all that time, I was still able to fit things into these different sections. But I think that in terms of like the scatteredness of it geographically, it's just one of those things where like the way you live your life comes out in your poetry. And I've lived a life of moving around a lot. And really, I think that part of it was, you know, I lived in New York pretty much my whole life until I was 18. And then I went to college in Minnesota. And I think it's always just like astounding to me to go to a different place and see everything that is totally normal or accepted where you're from is maybe the opposite in this new place.
Yeah, especially between the coasts like that.
Yeah. And things that are super, super important, you know, in New York are like not important at all in Minnesota, you know, or in Seattle, or for sure in Ecuador. So I guess there's like a freedom in that. I think, you know, growing up in the suburbs, you feel very, I don't know, I grew up in this suburb where you really have to have a car to get around. You can't like, It's not that easy to get around by public transit. And the trees arch over the streets like this. And so it's like, you can't see out. It's like you're in there. And you know, I look back on it with some nostalgia, but at the time I did feel a little bit like, whoa, like there's no getting out of here. And I have felt more and more like freedom and happiness in my life as I've just seen that like there's different ways of doing things. There's different ways of having a life. There's different ways of forming communities, and there's different ways of having values. I think that's really like life affirming and cool and interesting that like there's options.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, and you said you were working with kind of your whole body of work, putting the collection together. Did you find as you went through the poems that you wrote in different like geographic locations that like the focus has changed, or what you found important change? Like how did that manifest in your work?
That's an interesting question. I would say that in this book, a lot of it is home versus not home.
Yeah.
And past history versus now. And so I don't know. I think that the major thing in the book, the major poems that are different from all the other poems are the Ecuador poems. And part of that is because I wrote them well after I'd finished the first draft of the book. And I wrote them in my 30s, whereas a lot of the poems and the other poems in the book were written in my 20s. And there was just something, I mean, those poems are not, they're not mythologized. They're not stories like the other poems are.
Yeah.
They are factual. And I think just being a reporter kind of changed my inner world a little bit. It changed my inner world in that it brought me more into the outer world of other people. So I think there's something about those poems that's definitely different from all the others, and the values in them are different. It's more about like me meeting the outside world, whereas I think the rest of the poems are very interior. I mean, even the ones that take place outside, they're very much like, and I think there's something kind of childlike about a lot of them. a lot of them, I mean, a lot of them are from the perspective of a child, but I think even the ones that aren't, I think there is just this sort of like, this way of meeting the world that's very, very internal and very introspective. So yeah, I don't know if it's the landscape itself or just I think the Ecuador poems kind of are the ones that go past this divide of like home, not home. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about those binaries that comes through in the text of the home, not home, past, not past. Yeah. And the difference between those introspective elements and the extrospective elements. It's interesting too to hear about how your work as a journalist is affecting your poetry. Like, has that manifested in other ways where you feel like this sense of nonfiction and like the dedication to the truth kind of creeping into your more fictional tendencies?
Yeah, I would say when I wrote those, so in the book, there's 3 poems that take place in Ecuador. And when I wrote them, I think I thought, this is what my poetry is going to be from now on. It's going to be like reportage. And then I became a reporter. I mean, I would say my current, the project that I'm kind of finishing up right now is very lyric, and it's not like factual. And I think that is just the way my brain responds to the world. But I would say that reporting has changed the way I see like the ethics of writing poems.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, I think that, you know, I was trained. I mean, I was writing poems before I got my MFA, but I would say in my MFA that I did, the attitude was the author has the right to write about whatever they want. And if somebody is hurt by your writing, that is secondary to the art, because the art is like the highest and most important thing. And when you're writing nonfiction about other people, that's just not a good way to live, in my opinion. It's just not a good way to do it. And it's not ethical. So I think that being a reporter, and really, I mean, I was reporting on communities that were so much less privileged than me. You know, like people that were fighting for their land and their right to keep existing on their land. And I just didn't, like, there's just no way that you can say that like your article is more important than those people's lives. And so, you know, and I reported on a few violent conflicts, and I reported on people who were murdered. And it's just, once you start working with more vulnerable people, I hope that the general tendency is you stop and think, how is this going to affect this person's life, this article? And so I think that just became more ingrained in me. And now when I write, I mean, it's not part of the writing process. Like, I think the writing process is separate from this, but the revising and editing and deciding what to publish kind of process is like, I don't really want my art to, I don't really feel that my art is like worth more than somebody's feelings or somebody's privacy. And there's things that I wrote and published in the past that I would not publish now.
Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of how things changed for me being a journalist. I don't think, I do still sometimes write those poems that are more like fact-based and are more like in the realm of reality more. And I approach those with the same like questions that I have when writing an article or a nonfiction piece.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think there is this sense, thinking about like consent even of the subject in both of those types of writing. I agree with you, like I'm in an MFA program right now, and there's this sense of like, someone having existed in your life is opting into being fictionalized. They're opting into being present in your art. Like there's that sense of like really iffy consent of like, they're your memories and you have ownership over them, and your art is what's most important. And how that's so wildly different from being a journalist and visiting those kinds of communities and trying to figure out where like writing and reality meet and the ethics of that. And that's really fascinating, especially thinking about poems that you may have felt strongly about or published previously that you might not feel the same way about now in the wake of that experience.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like one way that I think about it is like, if you can think of your worst moment, and everybody has one, like we're not all perfect angels all the time, but would you want the moment that you're least proud of to be public and written about and published? And I don't think that anybody would. So I think it's important to think about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to think about what you just said in relationship to the other characters that appear in the text. In relationship to the speaker, I believe we have an aunt figure, a grandmother, and most prominently a sister. How did those other characters come to be? How did they develop throughout the collection? And how do you feel about that in relationship to those ideas about like consent and other people appearing in your writing?
Oof. That is a tough question. I would say that this book is, it's a book that might appear to reveal a lot, but there's a lot of hiding in it. And for example, the first poem in the book is complete mythology. The poem Dawn. I wrote it in the voice of Dawn, the character from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And
incredible.
No one gets that. I mean, like, not.
Oh my God, this is an exclusive to this Till interview. Dawn from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I try to mention that at readings because I've had people come up to me and say, I mean, I had somebody come up to me after a reading and say, like, I have a sibling that died, like, you must have a sibling that died. And I don't. So I think that obscuring, there's also a poem where the aunt hides evidence of a murder. That person was inspired by my aunts and uncles who lived here in California. But she's not exactly a real person. I mean, I would say like she's kind of in honor of those people who were kind of terrifying sometimes, but also like very interesting. And, you know, I loved them very much. They're no longer alive. So I guess I give myself like a tiny bit of leeway in that so many of the poems are very obviously not like true or factual. Mm-hmm. And some of the ones that appear to be true or factual are not. I never ran away from home and worked as a waitress and had a guy like masturbating on the floor above me. That didn't happen. So I guess that's why I try to, like, in interviews, I try to really emphasize that, like, this is a book of like fairy tales, and they might be ways of explaining things that I maybe have not been ready to like explain in a plain spoken, direct way. So I guess that's the leeway I give myself. I mean, I do feel like I do have questions about like some of the poems in the book, like, is this okay? You know, I don't know. But I kind of feel like with your immediate family, it's tough, right? Because that's your raw material.
Yeah.
I did have a poem in the book that was about a friend. And I quoted a letter that she wrote to me when we were 20. And I think like 5 years after I published that poem, I was like lying in bed. And I think like the poem she came to mind, something, I don't know what it was, but I like, all of a sudden I sort of like, I was like, oh my God, that was wrong. Like I should not have published that poem. And the poem was not even, I didn't even feel that it was an accurate portrait of like how I felt about our friendship. And it was a friendship that ended, you know, after college. I really sat down to write the poem wanting it to really be like kind of positive portrait of this person who I had a complicated relationship with. And it just kind of didn't come out that way. And I brought it to my writing group and I was like, no, but the point of this poem is like, this person loved me and I loved her, you know? And they were like, yeah, that's not in the poem, but like, that's not what the poem wants to be.
Yeah.
And like, let the poem be what it wants to be. And I think this is the kind of advice that maybe we give each other as like creative writers.
Mm-hmm. As like, let the piece become more itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had a teacher too, who, you know, I said to him, like, I don't know about publishing these poems about my family. And he said, your family's not going to read them. It's like, you know, people don't read literary journals. Like no one's going to read them. And of course, like my mother bought every literary journal. Like it didn't matter if it was online or not, you know, any of my poems were published. So like, that was terrible advice. I don't know, man. Like the creative writing world, the poetry world, like sometimes we just do not give each other good advice. Like, like about the craft and the art of it. But yeah, so I woke up 5 years later and I was like, oh my God, like, and it was one of my best poems. Like it was technically a very good poem.
Yeah.
But I pulled it out of the book. I took it off my website. And I mean, I think the position of that journal is once you publish with them, it's up forever. So, you know, it's out there, but I don't feel good about it. And I don't feel good about the fact that like, she probably read it. You know, I don't think I thought that she would. I don't think that thought ever entered my mind that would happen. So that's just a very long, I don't know, answer to your question.
No, that's so interesting and really helpful. I mean, I've had professors tell me something along the lines of like, oh, when they read it, they won't recognize themselves. Like the way you see people is so different. Like they're going to read it and they won't even know. And I'm like, I feel like they might. So just in the long lineage of questionable advice.
I will say that I have a poem that I wrote about a good friend of mine who's still my friend. And I cleared it with her. And it's about like trauma that happened in her family, due to, she's Pakistani, and like, you know, during partition, there was a lot of violence. And I called her and I read the poem to her, and I was kind of bracing for her to be like, how could you write about my, like, how dare you, you know? And she was like, Megan, I'm crying. This is so beautiful. You know, like people do.
Wow.
And there's another poem in that book, in that, so that poem is not in the book, but there's another poem that is in the book, Desahogarse, the one about learning Spanish. And that, I changed the name, but I think in the poem she's called Laura. And after the book was published, I said to my friend, you know, there's a book about your family there's a poem about your family in the book, and like, I hope you're okay with it. And I was like bracing for her to be like, you know, how dare you write about us? And she was like, Megan, like I read it to my mother, I read it to my sister, like we all love it, like, you know. So I mean, so there's that. It can go well.
Yeah, absolutely. For people who might want to find it, since it's not in the collection, what was the name of the poem about your Pakistani friend?
So that poem is called After Before, and you can find it. There's a link to it on my website. It was published in Glass Journal's Poets Resist. I don't know what you call it, sub-journal that they do online.
Okay, great. And if we can find the link, it'll also be in the description.
Okay, I can send it to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So yes, coming back to Animal at Your Side, something I really love about the collection is how fluid the lines between speaker, animal, and nature can become. Like, we're finding human teeth in the dirt, we're wrestling lions, we're coming to the edge of the woods and stumbling forward with new legs. I love that line so much. How does this fluid relationship between humanity and nature inform your work? Or how did those kind of very natural earthy poems come to be?
Wow, that's a good question. I feel like that's a question about something that for me is so like primal that there's nothing intellectual about it. You know, we create ways to survive in the world and ways to understand what's happening to us. And those ways are often not intellectual or reason-based, or like, you know, the whole Freudian or like kind of cognitive behavioral psychology mode that's like, this happened because of this or whatever. I think that the way that humans deal with things often is through kinds of myths. And for me, so much of the way I think and the way I like have dreams even is very image-based. So the images in the book are mostly images that sprang up in my mind. And I think I would think of it more as like documenting the way that my mind, if we can start with the premise that we all have in our minds ways of healing ourselves, that I would say it's more of documenting the way that my mind heals itself. And so I don't have like a literary answer to that question. I don't have like oh, you know, I did it because of this or that. I just, like, I know that poem Lion, that was something that I was really struggling with past trauma, and I was in a relationship with somebody, and I just had this feeling of like, and I was reading a book at the time by Mark Nepo called Chasing the Lion, Being the Lion. And there's a part of that book where he talks about there's a story in the Bible about Jacob wrestling an angel. And for him to meet the angel, he has to leave his family behind, like not permanently, right? But for that night, in order to, I believe he's crossing a river. He's trying to get back to see his brother, who he had a conflict with. And so Mark Nepo talks a lot about how like this is a story about spiritual struggle, and that it's something that you don't get to do in the company of your loved ones. It's something that sometimes you are doing it at the bottom of this dark ravine, all on your own. And so that is really what the poem is about. And like the words of it and the images of it, like, okay, so first time I did yoga.
Yes.
I was like, it was probably one of those hot yoga things too. And it was like the first time I had moved my body in those ways. And I believe it was probably at the end of the class that we were lying down. And I just was like I'm wrestling this lion. And it was kind of like trying to explain to a loved one, like, I'm wrestling with this right now and I have to do it on my own. And I wish that wasn't true. Like, I wish it was time for me to just stop doing this and just like be with you safe in the tent, you know, on the ledge. So, so that's kind of like the kinds of ways that those poems happened. Like a lot of it was just sort of like things that, you know, you have stuff that's like brewing in you, and like suddenly it's like there's a lion and you're wrestling with it in the dark and you're falling off a mountain and it sucks. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of like, it doesn't need to come from an intellectual place. There's just something really primal. And that comes through in the poem. There's something really primal about these experiences. I don't think they have to be intellectual in like a traditional sense.
Yeah.
So wonderful. And I love that it's like you and Shavasana having this vision of this image. It's amazing.
Yeah. I felt like I didn't even know what had happened to me. Like, and it was just from like doing, he was like, we're going to do a heart opener. And,
your heart, it was open.
Or maybe he said chest opener, but I took it as heart opener.
I think it might be heart. I am also a yoga novice. I think it is like a heart opening. There are positions that do that. People can correct us in the comments if you're a yogi.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so for our final question, for our Arthur's Corner project, we're promoting authors who have published with small indie presses. Can you talk us through your publication process and your experience with Airlie Press?
Sure. Do you want to know about my experience just with Airlie or with getting the book published?
Whatever you are willing to share.
Okay.
There are going to be people watching the interviews who are interested in small indie presses and how that works, maybe in how to get a book of poetry published. So yeah, anything you'd like to share or willing to share about your experience.
Yeah, sure. No, I've had people ask me about Airlie Press kind of as if I had all these options and I was like, this one will be the best one. And that's just not how it works with poetry. I mean, which is not anything against Airlie at all. It's just like, it's taking people, I mean, some people I think get snapped up right away and, you know, they're like a year out of college and suddenly they're famous, and that's happening now in the poetry world, which I think is great. I think it's amazing that we're starting to have like poetry rock stars again. But for a lot of us, it's like a real like 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 year slog to get your first book published. And so at that point, you're not really like picking and choosing. You're like weighing your options and figuring out how much money you have for submission fees that year, right? I was totally astounded when Airlie wrote to me and said that I had won the prize. And one thing I'm really grateful for is they announced the prize winner and the finalists at the same time. I've had a lot of other experiences of being a finalist and having like a 2-week wait to find out that I didn't win.
Yeah.
But I would say in terms of publishing with an independent press, I think it would behoove people to understand that like the press is going to do what they can for you, but they can't do everything for you. And that's just the nature of being like a smaller operation and having potentially like fewer resources. And so what I did and what I recommend that people do is talk to other poets that have published with small presses about what they did and what helped them, because it actually is up to you to market your book, unless you're extremely lucky and you get chosen for Author's Corner by the Inner Loop and suddenly you have this like amazing program behind you. But generally, like if you wait around for the press to tell you what you should be doing, you're going to kind of miss a lot of chances. So if your book is chosen, like say yay, say yes, sign the contract, ask them, what do I need to be doing? But don't just ask them, also ask other writers, like, what should I be doing right now, knowing that my book is coming out a year from now, 9 months from now, 6 months from now. I published my book during the pandemic, so a lot of the things that I had planned to do were not possible.
Yeah.
So this has all kind of been flying by the seat of my pants a little bit, and like the press was delayed with stuff. I mean, it was just such a, I mean, not for any fault of theirs, but like just that we were in a global crisis. So a lot of this has been figuring it out as I go, but your press will send you a really long marketing questionnaire. And I was told by friends of mine to take that really seriously, and I did. And it took me a really long time to fill that out. I think there's like 38 questions on there. And take the time to really do research and really think through those questions, because it's going to matter to the press, but also you can use it as your guide. Like when you do your, you know, whatever extent of the book tour that you decide you can afford, you can use that as a guide. When you're looking for book reviews, you know, suddenly your book is coming out, and luckily, because you filled out that questionnaire and really worked on it, you have a list of places where you're going to be trying to get book reviews. You want to definitely like do events and cast a wide net and try to like meet people who can introduce you to other people. I would say, like, for me, what's been essential has been knowing people like, people like Rachel and Courtney, who are just like, I don't know what name we should give these people, but they are like part of the engine making like the literary world run.
Yeah.
And so because I wrote to them like a year and a half ago now and said, I said, can I be a featured reader at the Inner Loop? And they said, well, no, you can't, because you would have to be chosen by the board, but we are going to do this program. Are you interested? You know, so I would say start cultivating those kinds of relationships now, and not in a fake way, like through genuine connection, you know?
Yeah.
I read at a series called Cultivating Voices, which is run by Sandra Yanone, who lives in Olympia, Washington. And she is one of those people who, she's so enthusiastic, she's so giving and amazing. And she was like, do you need book reviews? Like, do you know this person who writes book reviews and this other person who writes book reviews? So yeah, you just want to know a lot of people. You just want to live a good literary life. And if you're doing that, like that's all going to come back to you when your book is published.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And we're so happy to be here with you. I'm saying I'm speaking for Rachel and Courtney. We're so happy to have you here with us, and to be working with this book this month, or for next month. No, it'll be this month when this comes out. And that's all I have for you. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your questions. And I'm so happy and grateful to be part of Author's Corner. It's really like quite amazing as a program.
Yes, thank you. We're excited to have you. And I'm excited to hear you read from this at our reading for a month that I need to remember the name of. Which month?
I think it's July 20th.
Yes. Yes. Okay. The reading on July 20th. I'm so excited to hear you read from this collection.
Me too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So if you would like to find Megan on social media, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Megan_Alpert, on Instagram at Ayil, AYIL_M. Or you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Megan Alpert. However, I have stopped checking all of those things because they are poison to my mind. So the best way, actually, is if you go to my website, meganalpert.com, and go to the About page, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can also email me. You know, anyone who is interested in the book, I'm happy to get your emails. I would rather get that. No, yeah.
Okay, excellent. You heard it here. Sign up for the newsletter on meganalpert.com. Send her an email directly if you want to chat about the book. If you want to see more from us, The Inner Loop, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The Inner Loop Lit, and on Facebook at The Inner Loop. And you can find our YouTube channel, The Inner Loop, which you are presumably on right now. So subscribe. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.